Visual novel Fandiscs, as you may expect from the name, are fan service mini sequel entries usually saved for some of the most popular visual novels of all kinds, whether story or slice of life heavy. Many of them tend to be a little too short or shallow, so usually I'd only recommend them for the most hardcore fans of that series. However, there are some where I think they have quite a lot of content to the point where I would consider them much more heavy considerations to read, if not outright almost required reading. So in this video, I'm going to highlight 10 visual novel fandiscs that you should consider reading if you've read the original visual novel. The first visual novel fandisc I'm going to recommend is A Sky Full of Stars, Fine Days. The Sky Full of Stars visual novel by Pultop is one of my all-time favorites, having some really wholesome writing, likable heroines, and just generally really great art and presentation. The only real flaw I had with the original Sky Full of Stars is that it got a little too melodramatic at times, especially with the childhood friend love triangle. This fandisc, Fine Days, moves the vast majority of the bad melodrama, which is alone enough for me to consider it just a little bit better than the original Sky Full of Stars. Fine Days has the major aspects of what you'd expect from a fandisc, including after stories for the main heroines who had routes in the original. These routes are all pretty good and surprisingly lengthy, with each continuing the themes and character development presented from the original route instead of just being less than an hour of sex fan service like many end up being. Also common for fandiscs are new routes for 3 characters, Yoshioka, Hinami, and Miharu. What I thought was easily the best part of Fine Days was Miharu's route, aka the only really good teacher route in basically any visual novel that I've read. Miharu was someone who obviously was not in the best state of mind in the original Sky Full of Stars, and you get to see some little glimpses of how she became the way she was. Overall, Fine Days, to me, is the perfect example of how to make a really consistently interesting and wholesome fandisc, whether you choose to go for the routes you care about, or if you decide to read them all. The next visual novel fandisc I'm going to talk about is the Majikoi A series. This is an amusing case because Majikoi A was actually released in 5 separate entries: A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5. The original Majikoi is a great visual novel with a lot of characters. The sequel, Majikoi S, introduced even more new heroines and had a lot of routes, but even with that, they couldn't cover every single new heroine they introduced. So with the Majikoi A series, this served as a fandisc specifically to Majikoi S and giving all routes to all the new heroines. Unlike the original Majikoi and the Majikoi S, which had their own common routes, Majikoi A has the more classic fandisc style of just picking a heroine and you're immediately on their route. One of the things I give huge respect for the Majikoi series is somehow having a good mix of quantity and quality of heroines. Between the original Majikoi, S, and A, there are around 30 total heroines you can go into a route for. I suppose the main character Yamato is just the ultimate Riz master, because for the most part, he gets into almost all these relationships relatively naturally. Majikoi S had a problem where a lot of the newer routes were extremely short at being an hour tops, with maybe 3 to 5 routes being full length. S mostly went for the quantity over quality approach for the most part. Majikoi A fixes this by having every route being 5 to 8 hours each, aka full length. While there are a few duds here and there, if you're a fan of the series by the time you finished Majikoi S, there's a high chance you'll have at least a few heroines that you wanted to read routes for, and basically all of them are quality to some degree. So for that matter, that's why I heavily recommend Majikoi A as a fandisc. The next visual novel fandisc I'm going to bring up is the fandisc for Princess Evangile W Happiness. Similar to A Sky Full of Stars, Fine Days, it has the feature of having after stories for the original main heroines, in addition to new routes for characters that didn't have routes in the original. W Happiness mostly sticks out because it actually has more new routes than after stories, and all of them still have that subplot of Masaya attempting to help the goal of making the main school co-ed. Another pretty neat feature of W Happiness is that there's an option to reread the common route of the original in this fandisc. So if you waited a long time to read W Happiness after the original and just wanted a refresher of the common route to see which new heroine you wanted to see a route for, this is a pretty neat option, and I kind of wish more visual novel fandiscs considered including something like this. Overall, W Happiness is standard fare for fandiscs, and unless you didn't like any of the non-main 4 original Princess Evangile heroines, I heavily recommend checking out W Happiness. The next visual novel fandisc I want to talk about is D2B vs. Deardrops. This is a very unique fandisc in a few ways. The first is that it's actually a fandisc for 2 visual novels by Overdrive, Kira Kira and Deardrops. This essentially makes this one of the few official crossover canon visual novel fandiscs to exist. Secondly, this visual novel fandisc is completely 100% linear and takes place after the true routes of both Kira Kira and Deardrops. That's also 100% all ages, so if you were really curious to see more of the characters from both visual novels, see how the main casts from both would interact with each other without worrying about sexual content, I think this is a great one to check out. I thought in particular the continuation of Kira Kira's story was quite interesting, because while I liked the true route of Kira Kira, it did feel like there were some emotional loose ends that I thought were greatly covered in this Fandisc. Outside of that, just seeing two different bands come together in what you may predict a crossover concert, and having the members interact about their shared instruments and all that stuff, and just a wholesome time, I personally consider D2B vs Deardrops a great visual novel Fandisc for two good visual novels. The next visual novel Fandisc I'm going to talk about is the one for Kinero Loverich, commonly known as Kinkoi, Golden Time. This is one of the first Fandiscs I would consider almost required reading. Similar to many Fandiscs mentioned early on in the video, this has the common thing where it has after stories for the main routes from the original and new routes for a couple of characters that didn't have routes in the original Kinkoi. However, the main thing that I would say sticks out about Golden Time in particular is that it actually has a brand new common route. This common route specifically sets up how potential routes would work for the two main new heroines, Ayaka and Mina, and in addition gives these two some brand new sprites. Just keep in mind this new common route casually has minor spoilers for a bunch of stuff revealed in the original visual novel. The original Kinkoi had some degenerate humor in situations, but Golden Time kinda went a step further in that regard. This is especially true in Ayaka's route, which many people considered a highlight of this Fandisc due to the main progression of the route being heavily sex and comedy heavy. The other major thing that sticks out about Golden Time is that it has an alternate universe of one of the main routes of the original. I won't spoil what it is, but if you read the original Kinkoi, you could probably guess what route would deserve an alternate universe. So if a unique common route, more goofy degenerate routes, and or an alternate universe sound interesting, I would heavily recommend reading the Golden Time Fandisc for the Kinkoi series. The next visual novel Fandisc I'm going to talk about is one for Hoshizora no Moria, commonly known as Hoshimemo, Eternal Heart. This is another case where I would almost consider this required reading, but in a different way from Kinkoi Golden Time. There were two locked routes at the end of the original Hoshimemo that somewhat got the short end of this stick. One route just got cut off at a weird moment with some loose ends, and the other route was so short it almost felt like a slap in the face for fans of that character. Thankfully, Eternal Heart fixes this issue for these two characters in specific, each getting full-length routes that should satisfy people that weren't fully satisfied from their routes from the original. Of course, just like most Fandiscs, there are very short after stories for the other main heroines from the original, aka they're not even an hour long each. I would definitely recommend Eternal Heart if you really wanted to see more of the two major heroines that got cut off, so to speak, in the original Hoshimemo. The next visual novel Fandisc I'm going to talk about is the one for Keys' rewrite, Harvest Festa. Key is no stranger to having Fandiscs or after stories, but the two that came before were one heroine only eroge that honestly didn't really interest me. Thankfully, Rewrite Harvest Festa was done by the original team and has after stories or alternate universes for every single heroine. Rewrite in the original visual novel was quite heavy in every route, so it's a nice change of pace for every heroine to get a more light-hearted story. Although as said, most cases are merely alternate universes for said character instead of being direct sequels. Naturally, as someone very biased towards Kotori, I read Harvest Festa mostly for her route, especially knowing hers was one of the few unambiguous direct sequels. Her Harvest Festa route had a better romantic conclusion, and with that I was more than satisfied, with them tying all the emotional loose ends that the original Kotori route kinda left on a cliffhanger. There's also this amusing alternate universe minigame called Rewrite Quest. Clearly based off some old school dungeon crawler JRPGs, you can use Kotaro and the main heroines in some amusing gameplay sections. If you're looking for more of your favorite Rewrite heroines in more light-hearted situations, and possibly a fun alternate gameplay mode with all the main heroines, I heavily recommend Rewrite Harvest Festa. As of this video, Ao no Kanata no 4 Rhythm, or commonly known as Aokana, actually has two released Fandiscs, Extra1 and Extra2. Both are one heroine only after stories from the original. Normally, I'm not really interested in Fandiscs that only focus on one heroine, but Sprite puts so much effort into both of these extra Fandiscs that I couldn't help but not check them out. Extra1 focuses entirely on Mashiro. Mashiro's route was easily the most romance-heavy of the original Aokana, and Extra1 basically goes all in on that aspect. It ended up being one of the most wholesome, heartwarming Fandisc stories I've ever read in any visual novel. Just the amount of detail they made in the graphics, the dates, the interactions between Masai and Mashiro were quite fulfilling to read. They also kept in some of the goofy humor from the original that made Extra1 even better, especially around our girl Madoka. So if you just wanted to see more super wholesome romance, consider checking out Aokana's Extra1. Aokana's Extra2, on the other hand, is on the complete opposite side of the spectrum in terms of tone. Instead of being completely wholesome slice of life focused, it goes all in on the flying circus action and drama. Extra2 in particular is so well received that not only is it basically required reading, Some people even outright consider it better than the original Aokana as a whole. Most Fandisc routes are usually about 5 hours maximum, but Extra2 is around 10 hours, making it a full-length sequel route, something we rarely see in visual novels. If you're a fan of intense flying circus action, and or you like the light psychological themes related to Misaki's character development, you basically have no reason not to check out Extra2, and thankfully, the graphics and overall presentation are as great as ever. The last visual novel Fandisc I'm going to talk about is Ashar Kuni's Yukyuu no Shounenshoujo. This visual novel Fandisc has the typical after stories for the main heroines as one might expect. However, this one was very unique in that the star of the show is straight up a whole flashback route for the main villain, Masami Hozuki. Hozuki is generally considered one of, if not the best visual novel villain. Anytime the main character Kenichi interacted with him, there was always that looming suspense of what Hozuki might do, whether to give Kenichi some punishment or just make some potentially big reveal. Hozuki's flashback Fandisc route was very interesting in terms of showing how he became the villain he was in the original Ashar Kuni, in addition to having some foils of his development compared to the original protagonist Kenichi. While I personally don't like Hozuki as much as other people do, I do have to admit this Fandisc backstory for him is very much almost required reading to understand him more, and I'm kind of surprised it wasn't included in the original in some way. Either way, if you're interested in reading a unique villain backstory route for a visual novel Fandisc that's quite engaging, I highly recommend Ashar Kuni Yukyuu no Shounenshoujo. Don't worry, they still find a way to fit in vanilla wholesome sex even in a villain backstory like this. And that is it, 10 notable visual novel Fandiscs I personally recommend reading. What is your opinion on the visual novel Fandiscs that I chose to highlight? Or were there any that I chose not to mention that you thought I should have? Feel free to leave a comment below.